It's episode 74 of the Improv London podcast. I'm your host, Stuart Moses, and this week's guest is Emily Brady.
Hello!
Hello, how are you?
I'm good, how are you?
I'm very well. You're from Nottingham.
I am from Nottingham, but I am from London originally,
Wow.
so it's not too controversial.
You don't have to establish your credentials here, you're amongst friends here. I suppose the only reason I called this the Improv London podcast is because I'm in London and I wanted to talk about improv. It was certainly never, I don't want to speak to anyone anywhere else.
Yeah, but for the record, I was born in Whipps Cross, so...
Right, okay, fair enough.
For the hate mail.
How did you get into improv in the first place? What's your sort of improv origin story?
Well, I grew up watching... I know it's such a cliche, but I grew up watching Whose Line Is It Anyway? And just being obsessed with it. And I wanted to do it, I loved it, I did a lot of theatre, I did a lot of musicals as a kid. And I had a moment when I was probably like 16 and I went to the Globe and the Comedy Store Players were performing there. And I was like still really, really into improv and I really wanted to do it, but I was a bit like, oh, it just seems like so inaccessible, like a completely different world. And it was like the Comedy Store Players and Greg Proops was in it. And afterwards I went to the stage door and all the Comedy Store Players were up on a balcony. And I was like, I want to ask for their autograph, but I'm so terrified. And Richard Branch saw me and came all the way downstairs and got a piece of paper and then went all the way back up and got them all to sign it and then came all the way back down. And he said something to me like, oh, are you a fan of improv? And I was like, I think I said something like, oh yeah, but I could never do it like that. And he was like, no, you definitely should. And from then I was just like, okay.
Oh, brilliant.
So I was applying to unis and I went to the Uni of Nottingham and I saw that they had an improv society and I was just like, yeah, that's it. Like, it's probably quite shameful how much of the reason that I went to Nottingham was because of that society.
Wow.
But yeah, I went along and they had troupe auditions and I auditioned and I got in and yeah, that was it really. I was in that for 2 years and then I took a break from improv for a couple of years because I lived in America for a year. And then I moved back to Nottingham recently and I've fallen in with Miss Imp, which is the Nottingham non-uni improv group.
Right.
There's also another one called Nice, which is brilliant, but Miss Imp is the one that I tend to slot in with the best.
Cool. How did you get involved with Miss Imp and how does it work and that sort of thing?
Yeah, so Miss Imp has a few performance troupes and I was just incredibly lucky that, so the musical one that they have, Rhymes Against Humanity, had been going for a year when I moved back and a couple of people had just dropped out. And so I just went along to a Miss Imp show that wasn't a musical show and mentioned to someone who I used to know from my time in the uni of improv that, I'd love to do some improv and do some musical improv again. And Marilyn, she literally grabbed me by the arm and dragged me into a back room and was pitching it to me for a solid hour. And I was like, you don't need to pitch this to me, I'm sold. So I auditioned and it was a great audition because it wasn't a formal intimidating setup. It was me and another guy, Pete. We were invited into a rehearsal and it was all just very much, if it clicked then it would be great. If it didn't then we'd see where we were. But I was very, very rusty. It was a lot of open scenes and afterwards I realised that I'd completely ripped off a chorus from that musical episode of Buffy. And I was like, that was a really catchy chorus and oh god, it was literally that. But thankfully no one in the room had seen that episode of Buffy or they just didn't mention it and I've, to my knowledge, never ripped off anything since.
Well, I mean, the thing is that there are only so many combinations of notes, and as long as you weren't trying to manufacture it so that scene came about so you could sing the song verbatim.
No.
Although there's part of me that really wants to do that. Now I know you put that idea in my head. There are only so many choruses, and if you take it in a different context, then what can you do? I was recently at the Maydays retreat, and we did. Katie Shute did movie songs in which we were invited to pitch a scene from a film and then we were to sing a song based on that situation in the film, and I pitched the pilot of Buffy, and I got to play Giles.
That's the dream.
Well, it wasn't very much the dream. And Jenny, who had never seen Buffy, played Buffy very well, and we tapped into the essential dichotomy of her destiny as a Slayer, and wanted to be popular at school. So that was a really lovely moment.
I don't know if I should confess this on like an auditory format that can be sued, but I did a few weeks ago in a show. We were doing a show that we got the title from the audience, Cannibals in Love.
Right.
Which is just like a beautiful title to get. It's just, like there's relationships, you're just like, we can just like, it's going to be a certain degree of good with a title that good. And I ended up doing a verse that was just a parody of Taylor's Oldest Time, except about how I wanted to eat the person I was in the scene with. And afterwards I was like, that was very just me changing the words of an existing song, but it was only for a bit of a song, and I think it was fine.
I think that comes under fair use. I reckon that's sampling. Let's talk about the sort of average Rhymes Against Humanity show. What do you call out for, and then what sort of format do you follow?
It depends on the show a bit. What we tend to do ideally is we'll get a hat, and we'll have a little sign that says, please put titles for musicals in a hat. And we do say, no Brexit or Trump.
Yes,
because I think improv's supposed to be about fun and escape, and oh god, like none of us want that at the moment.
Every week, you'd just be doing it every week. I mean, I feel sorry for showstoppers and people like that, because it's like, oh, here we go again.
Yeah. When in Edinburgh, I was seeing Baby Wants Candy, and it was just like chants of Trump, and I was like, this is really uncomfortable for so many reasons.
Yeah. No. Wow. How did they tackle that?
I think they were quite good about that, and then they went for an equally hilarious title that was about something else.
Yes.
But what I like about the way that we do titles is we'll tend to get 2 or 3 out of a hat, and then the audience is encouraged to cheer for which one they like.
Right. Yeah.
So that way you tend to get it's proven that it's improvised because you're giving them a choice.
Yes.
And it's just a more rounded way of doing it, I think.
Yes, and you're not beholden to just taking the first suggestion. You're going to take a suggestion, but it's going to be the best one that you can. And I love getting people to write stuff down.
Yeah.
Because shouting stuff out appeals to a certain demographic, but it doesn't appeal to everybody. And also, you get complexity and subtlety lost if you have to shout something out, which if you get it written down, that's a lovely thing.
Yeah.
So you'll get a suggestion for a musical, and then what will happen?
Yeah, well, we always tend to open with a really high energy opening number, and we it's fairly flexible the way that we do that. So sometimes it will be like a line at a time song and then a chorus, or it will be a verse and a verse from different people in a chorus. Sometimes it's all about creating like scenescapes where people are doing different things and creating an environment. My favourite way to start is probably when you match each other, and someone starts with a sound and a movement, and then you go from there. Like the Maydays are just the masters of that. Yes. I saw them do that in Edinburgh, and it was about a coffin making shop, and they were it was just incredible. We've kind of shamelessly stolen that.
No, I think you've learned from the best there, and I love matching. I love matching somebody, because it's like, I don't know what to do. Oh look, there's someone doing something. I'll just do that, and then that suddenly that's a brilliant thing to do. It's like, well, I didn't really do anything. I'm just copying what the other person does as accurate as I can. And I love that. So you say in the opening song, the format can change. So sometimes one person will sing one verse, sometimes one person will do a line. How do you make sure you don't all start singing at the same time?
Flamboyance.
Excellent.
I think it's just like we really clearly signpost when it's like, I'm going forward for a line, and then you back off really quickly to give people enough time to think of a rhyme and to go in. It's not something we normally agree on in advance. It just sort of happens, and I think it depends on the kind of song that it is as well. Like, we don't tend to start musicals with somber numbers, but if it's a bit more downbeat and atmospheric, then it tends to be like a bit more grounded in like one person doing something at a time and the rest of everyone else building up the atmosphere. Whereas if it's quite high paced and energetic, it just kind of makes sense to have one person doing each line, because then it's like bouncy and keeping up with it.
Yeah. And you have an accompanist?
Yes, we do. We have two.
Two.
And they're both called Sam, which is brilliant to remember. We've got Sam Plummer and Sam Marshall, and they're both phenomenal pianists. And we've just invested in a drum machine, which is the best thing. Like, oh my God, I can't even begin to tell you. Like, it's transformative. Just
what's the drum machine brought to it?
Oh, it gives it, I don't know, it's so much more like energy and drive behind it. And it's probably a subconscious thing, but I found myself making a lot more like physical dance choices when there's a drum beat, because with the piano, like a lot of the times you sort of stamp your foot to create a beat, or you just the tendency can be to sometimes just stay in place. But when there's a drum beat, it's very, very quick to find the rhythm and smooth with that. So, I love having a drum machine. And we're also really lucky because one of our members, Liam, he can also play the saxophone.
Oh, wow.
And that's been really interesting to experiment with, because like I always kind of thought that the saxophone in a song like replaces the vocal. So you think of like Baker Street. But it can work like really, really well and create some really, really like brilliant sounds.
So he'll just be performing, and then he'll just like reach over and then just pull out a saxophone and start playing.
Yeah, I think that's the end game. At the moment, it's been like he'll either sit out of a run and do that, or he'll like come in. There's also been like a tiny flute in some runs.
Wow.
So I don't know, like you suddenly realise that all these people can play instruments, and you're just a bit like, whoa.
But isn't it? Yeah, it's lovely. I mean, it's great just having a piano accompanist or a guitarist or anything. But if you've just suddenly got these extra instruments coming in, it's like for the audience, it's like, oh, what's that? And it's like, oh wow, you can do that as well, and that can bring in something else as well. Yeah, it's lovely.
Rumours persist that we're doing our show at the Nottingham Playhouse in a few weeks on the 28th of October, I think. And Sam Marshall can play the violin.
Wow.
And it's a spooky, haunted musical idea. So if we could have a violin in there, that would be really, really cool. But I don't know if that will happen, because it might be too scary for the audience.
Maybe next year.
Yeah.
So once you've done an opening song, how do you then lead into what follows?
So what we tend to like to do is start with a really a strong protagonist scene with a very, very clear I want song, which are great to do. I think occasionally one of my weaknesses is that I tend to overcomplicate things, because I'm like, how can just me wanting more like a Disney princess be compelling? But then of course it is. So it always tends to be, we're quite a large troupe. We're about 9 people when we're at our fullest.
Right.
So there can be quite a lot of people on stage. But I think one of the things I love about playing with rhymes is just that everyone is so like able to give up space. Like no one's ever vying for the spotlight. It's a very collaborative troupe.
Yeah.
And I just think it's a really, really nice way to improvise, to like know that someone's always got your back, and like, oh, I can take a solo here if I want to, or it can be a great group number where everyone's going to come in the back and support me. The last run we did at the Playhouse, I ended up playing Beyonce.
Right, nice.
Which was great, because I hadn't gone on until... we tend to like to establish everything in the first 3 scenes as much as possible. So obviously there's room for like playing around outside of that, but I think the audience will probably begin to lose interest if you introduce too many characters after a certain point.
Yeah, you want to create, and then you want to start reincorporating.
Yeah, playing with what you have. And so it was sort of the 3rd scene, and I hadn't been on stage yet, and I was like, oh, I really... Like, I guess I'll just come on and like be supporting characters and do a lot of background dancing. And this mad scientist character went, if only Beyonce was here. And I was like, right, that's an offer.
Well, see, that's fine. If you were constantly casting yourself as Beyonce, I feel that would be a time for them to take you aside. It's like, we love you as Beyonce, but does it have to be every week? Whereas if someone's endowed, that's a lovely opportunity.
Yeah.
So when one is performing as Beyonce, how does one embody Beyonce?
Oh, I think this was last year. Well, it wasn't last year, it was this year, it was February. And it was just after she'd announced her pregnancy.
Right.
So I was just massively pregnant and like, did a lot of like warbling and kept saying I'm Beyonce just in case the audience had forgot.
I think that's a very good tip.
Yeah, because I have a very like with fourth walling in improv, it's such a thing where in paper I'm like, no, you don't do that. You commit to the reality. But at the same time, sometimes it's like, it's quite funny to just be like, I'm Beyonce, and just keep checking in with the audience to make sure they haven't forgotten.
I've been reading a bit about clowning and the idea that the fourth wall exists being quite a recent invention, and actually, clocking the audience, checking in how they're doing, how they're enjoying it. It's a really interesting tool, and I wouldn't say I'd use it all the time, but it's just like there are times when it's just useful to have that in your tool belt. Yeah, well, the first show I did at the Edinburgh Fringe was a show called Unstable Fables, and it was a musical Harold, basically. But the trick to the show was that it was all about sort of moral choices. So every now and again we'd stop the action and we'd go to the audience and we'd ask them what choices. We'd sort of present them with a kind of Telltale game style choice, and they'd have to pick one. Yeah. And that would sort of then propel the story forwards. All right, that's a nice idea.
Or not, if they chose if they chose poorly. But that never happened in a live show. So
one would hope, if you are giving the audience options, that you would be able to favour it into two interesting directions, or is that not?
Well, yeah, I remember one show I did where I was a spoilt little rich girl, and one of the other improvisers was a gorilla in a cage, and he was like, please let me out. And so I went to the audience and I was like, should I let him out of the cage? And then as the words were coming out of my mouth, I was like, God, what a terrible, terrible thing to put to an audience, because if they say no, nothing is going to happen in this scene. But thankfully the audience was kind, and they were like, yeah. And I was like, great.
Yes, I suppose with the benefit of hindsight, you should choose whether or not the gorilla's going to come out of the cage, but then you should give them the option of, I don't know, something else. It's hard. It's not that easy, even though we're not even on stage now.
Yeah.
So once you've done the opening song, and so you would do a scene into an I Want song to establish the protagonist?
Yeah, or? Typically.
Yeah. And then, so you have 3 scenes to try and establish the world?
Yes, as far as possible. So we always try and work in a really strong antagonist, and we normally have quite a lot of fun with playing comic relief as well.
Right, yeah.
But sometimes the comic relief really links into the story. So, if there's a bit of a disconnect between the protag and the antag, then it's like, oh, we need a sort of bridge, and this will be a bridge, or it's just pointless comic relief.
Right, okay, cool.
And I have a very, my kind of instinct in improv is to be quite emotional.
Right, yes.
And I'm quite often, when I try to play the comic relief or the villain, I often find myself because I think my default thing to do in a scene is to fall back on emotion and making emotional choices. So sometimes I struggle playing comic relief a bit, because it's it's a way of trying to ground it in emotion without just making the emotion the only thing.
Yes, because I'm in very much the same way. And one for grounding any character I play in emotion. Playing the truth of that emotion is very much my way into a scene.
Yeah.
So actually, playing the antagonist plays into that for me, because if you can, make the antagonist emotionally real, that's kind of all right. I've never done well at playing comic relief, unless I'm playing with somebody else who is very good at playing comic relief, and then I can play it straight, and I can play the emotion of it, and then that will work. But I've yet to discover how to do comic relief. How to be funny.
Yeah, I sometimes struggle playing villains, because I think I struggle to make them. This sounds like such a humble brag, but I tend to be quite emotional, and so sometimes they come across a bit too sympathetic, and I'm like, no, I'm a jerk. I'm really, really mean, honest.
Well, no, but if your antagonist has got, they're much more effective if if there's a reason for why they're doing something, rather than just because they're evil.
Yeah, and that's probably villain songs are just so much fun.
Yes.
I love a good villain song. Everyone in Rhymes is really, really good at them, and it's just diabolical. Because I want songs hero songs are great, and group songs are always wonderful, but there is just something about a good villain song.
So when you say villain song, what do you mean by that?
I guess it's kind of the shadow of the I Want song. It's a very, this is what I want, and it's evil, as opposed to this is what I want, and it's whimsical and wonderful. And I just really, really love a good diabolical, evil song.
Yeah. the first time I played an antagonist was at a Showstoppers showcase, and we were doing Great British Bake Off as the setting.
Oh, God.
And I hadn't been in it for about 3 scenes, and then Andrew Pugsley, who's narrating it, brought me in as the antagonist, as the evil kind of person on Bake Off.
Were you Paul Hollywood?
I didn't want to say Paul Hollywood. Because, well, the thing is that I've never actually watched Bake Off. But the thing is, I don't feel I need to, because I've just been around it often enough that I've kind of absorbed it. So I felt I played what I imagined Paul Hollywood to be like, and it was just me going around and just like being horrible to people, which I do neither in real life nor on stage usually. So it was such a joy to do, and it really helped the production, and it was just, a really lovely thing. And so I've practiced being horrible.
Yeah, I think it's really hard to be horrible on stage sometimes, because you kind of forget that everything you do on stage as an improviser is a gift to the other performer.
Yes.
So if you're horrible to them, that's just as much a gift as if you're lovely to them.
Yes.
And as long as you're not bullying them as an improviser, then you should trust them to react appropriately when you're horrible to them. But sometimes you're just like, no,
I'm a lovely person. I want to play lovely people on
stage.
It's
my fellow teammate. I don't want to take over their allotment or...
Oh, I do now. Oh, yes, I want to play an antagonist that just wants to take over the allotment. Yeah, as you say, it's much better to be, hot or cold, but lukewarm is the least helpful thing that you can be in those sort of situations.
Yeah.
So you'll have your scenes, so you'll have the opening, you'll have the heroes I want, you'll maybe have a bit of comic relief, you'll have the antagonist song. How do you then start reincorporating it? How do you sort of go to the next? What's next? Well,
normally it tends to be pretty... so after our first 3 scenes, normally, it tends to be pretty freeform.
Right.
So normally what will happen is the protagonist will come back and the story will begin to advance. One actually kind of interesting thing that we've had recently is that we found that we've sort of subconsciously gone into quite a formal Harold structure.
Oh, right.
Which... I think it can really work, but we've all sort of gone we need to mix it up immediately, quite soon after the 3 beats, because otherwise what ends up happening is you have the protagonist singing about what they want, the villain sings about what they want, comic relief sing about something silly, and then the protagonist is there again, but nothing's really changed, or I think we just it's a matter of being a bit bold with choices and just being okay, so I'm the baddie, so I'm going to go on now and do some bad stuff and just really really mixing it up. But one of the things that I really like about improvising with rhymes and with missing more broadly as well in jams and workshops is that it does tend to be quite freeform after a point. So once you've got all the information out, it's just right now we are going to increase the fun and just muck about and trust that the audience is having a good time.
So once you've done that, how do you bring the narrative to a close, or the Harold, or whatever you're doing? How do you bring
With skill and aplomb.
Brilliant. That's good. That's what I need to know. I just wanted to check. I presume that would be the case.
So obviously it's hugely dependent on the story. One thing we've kind of been without even really discussing it, but experimenting with more recently, because obviously we've got the Halloween show coming up, is having musicals that don't necessarily end happily.
Oh, right.
Because our default tends to be we resolve the issue through callbacks and through various bits, and just in rhymes, the villain tends to be redeemed more so than anything else. They tend to realise the error of their ways and become friends with, or whatever, with the protagonist, which is great, and it's very musical theatre. But we did a run actually on Tuesday where I was the villain, because as I said, I'm not great with playing villains, so I was like, oh, no one's been the villain yet. Okay, it's my time. And it wasn't the best run we've ever done, but it was at the end of it, the villain failed, and I think. Yes, I died.
Oh, right.
And then it kind of changes the dynamic of the ending song. Our ending song tends to be quite a big group number. Just by having the plot be resolved, the cast tend to all end up back on stage, or they'll come on as in the back. But in this particular one, it was really interesting because it had ended with a death, and even though it was a death of the bad guy, it was a bit we can't quite go into a happy everything is great number. So that's really, really fun to experiment with.
Yeah, that sounds really powerful.
Yeah, well, that's the thing I like about rehearsals for improv, and that I think I can sometimes forget is that, like, rehearsals are kind of designed for you to fail a little bit. Like, you shouldn't be afraid to try stuff and to have it not go quite as well as you'd hoped.
Yeah.
And I actually always find it much more helpful when shows go badly in rehearsal. So, for instance, in the one on Tuesday, there was like moments where I should have really gone in and been the bad guy, but I was just like, no, wait, let's see where this scene is going, and I'll maybe go in a minute where I should have just been assertive and been like, boo. But I think that's the thing. Just improv, you kind of need to be a little bit cocky and a little bit assertive, otherwise you will just stand at the sidelines all the time.
And it's easy to get wrapped up going, yeah, this is really interesting, I'm really enjoying it.
Oh my god, the amount of times I've forgotten that I'm in the show.
I suppose that shows that you're in the right group, because if you're always going, oh, this is awful, then that would be awful. So you mentioned rehearsals. How often do you rehearse?
Once a week.
Brilliant. And what's the sort of setup? Do you have a particular format you follow, or? It
depends if we've got any shows coming up. So we tend to really do quite a few runs in the weeks up to shows. Which is really, really useful, because it kind of gives you a chance to play opposites of what you do a bit. So, for instance, I think it's never been an official rule, but if, for instance, you were a protagonist in the first run, then you would probably try and play a more supportive role in the second run. And it gives a chance for everyone to play against their defaults and play against their types a bit. And often we'll experiment with new song structures, and occasionally we'll try and develop some short form games for pub sets and stuff. So we recently started doing charity singles with rap breaks. I really want to do more improvised rap. I'm terrible at it, but I
probably thought you had natural flow. And I wasn't going to ask you to do any, because that's very much a rule on the podcast, is that we talk about improv, we don't do improv.
Yeah, it's the Londoner in me, definitely.
Yes, I did, when I did a Hoopla improvised musical course, we did a charity single as the climax of our showcase. And I thought, it's a big Steve Rowe thing, but he says, just work on one thing. Don't try and remember everything to do with improv, just try and work on one thing. And I slightly changed that, and I just said, right, to myself, if I do nothing else tonight, I'm going to do the rap during the charity song. And weirdly enough, there wasn't a lot of competition. I strode forward and nobody else was striding forward to do the rap. And I'm like, I can't remember what it was now, but it was so much fun. And, I'm not the world's greatest rapper. I mean, contrary to what you might have heard, I'm not.
Surely not.
Some people say I am, and if they want to say that, that's fine. My favourite idea for improvised rap is that you have rap battles where you say terrible things about the other rapper.
Yeah.
I'd like to flip that and just have one where you're really complimentary about the other one.
That's a really good idea.
And just
see what I did there.
Yeah. Oh, you got me. And just say I really appreciate the work you do in the community, that sort of thing.
Your hair looks really good today.
Exactly. That's now just a lovely. It's an inherently comic, but also a really loving and beautiful kind of thing to do. So where does your love of improvising rap come from?
Oh God, Hamilton. Hugely Hamilton. We Miss Imp invited Susan Harrison up for a workshop. A few weeks ago, and it was brilliant. I spoke to her afterwards, and I recorded it for the improv podcast I'm working on.
All right, we'll talk about that in a minute. If you're lucky.
But yeah, she was talking off podcast, because I was just really grilling her about all the show stuff and stuff. I found it so interesting, and it must be so difficult to be suddenly rapping musicals is really, really mainstream, and every show that was getting suggested, I saw them in Edinburgh this year, and that was one of the ones that was suggested, and they were just so great at it.
Yes, having spoken to Duncan Walsh-Atkins, the musical director, he was saying how actually that's fine. Getting Hamilton all the time is fine, because it's so rich and there's so many things you can pull from it. You can have that every night, and there's still something fresh that you can do.
Yeah.
Whereas with Cats or West Side Story, maybe it's harder to be enthusiastic about those things.
Yeah.
So you mentioned Hamilton. Are you keeping up with musicals that are around? Is that something you've done since you've been improvising, or that's just a love you have anyway?
I think, it's just a love I have anyway. I've always been really, really into theatre and musical theatre. I did it before improv, and then when I took a couple of year break from improv, I did a lot of theatre and musicals then.
Oh, wow.
And so, I've just always kept up with it, and I think just for me personally, I know plenty of improvisers who only do improv or only do stand-up comedy, and they're brilliant. But for the style of improv I like to do, which can be like quite emotional and quite grounded in reality, I always try and keep up with what's going on in like musicals and theatre and stuff.
So I'm actually the opposite. I'm a complete convert to musicals, as in that I never liked them, and I thought, I can't understand this. Why are they singing all that sort of nonsense? And then I started improvising, and something clicked in my brain. I thought, oh, that's what they are. That's how they work. And now I love them, and I listen to Encore Radio all the time, and I just, I can't get enough of them.
Yeah.
But say that wasn't me. But for a listener who wants to get up to speed with musicals, maybe they want to improvise musicals or anything, what would be your 3 key musicals that they should listen to?
Oh, that's really, really tough.
I'm asking the tough questions.
That's really tough.
Well, name me 3 musicals that you like.
Oh, that's easier.
I could do that.
Well, I'd probably say you have to listen to a Stephen Sondheim.
Yeah.
And my favourite, without a shadow of a doubt, is Sweeney Todd. I just love it. But probably if you're looking to get into musicals, then Into the Woods is the one to listen to, because it's got the balance of like fairy tale, lightheartedness, musicality, and really, really dark stuff as well.
Yes.
Whereas Sweeney Todd is just all that, and I love it. Like, don't get me wrong, it's my favourite musical. But I think Into the Woods is probably a good one to listen to for that. And then I do think it's worth going back to the super cheesy, Disney-esque early days. So stuff like The Sound of Music is just a really, really good starting point if you want to know stuff about musicals. And Julie Andrews is just beautiful, amazing, wonderful woman. I say that as though I've met her. I've not met Julie Andrews.
I'm sure all of those things are true.
But me and Julie, we go way back. And I'd also just suggest looking at who's won Tonys and who's won awards and following through on a couple of songs from them, because what will happen is you will just find one that really, really connects with you. Or for my final one, I'd say Title of Show. It's an off-Broadway musical about 4 people putting on an off-Broadway musical.
Right, okay.
And I normally really struggle with meta theatre because I just think it's so easy, but it is just... It's so clever and rich and varied in what it does, and there's so many different styles of song, and it's so heartfelt because it's about all the relationships that they share while doing this, and it's all just so grounded in reality. There's a song called A Way Back to Then, which is all about this woman singing about how she's just enjoying being in this show, and it just makes me tear up every time I listen to it because it makes me think it's how I feel doing improv.
Right,
the sense of being part of something and being part of a community. So Title of Show, Sound of Music, and Into the Woods / Sweeney Todd. You're welcome.
So when you're performing with rhymes, you don't ask for a genre. That's just something. No,
sometimes it's kind of informed. So if we get a really, really genre-specific title, then we've had a few ones with tangos and more adventurous musical styles in there. But it's a really, really interesting way of doing musicals. But I think we tend to focus more on the story and more on the characters rather than the style of music.
Yes.
The approach that we tend to follow is, I know that someone really famous has said this, and I can't remember who it is, but singing is what you do when words are no longer enough.
Oh, yes.
When the emotion gets to a point where it's too much to just be conveyed by words alone, so you have to start singing.
Yes.
And I think for us personally, that's a better way of approaching it rather than being we're going to do this song and we're going to do it in the style of Avenue Q.
Right,
Which is another one you should listen to.
Yes. I have heard of Avenue Q. I'm not going to sing the one line that pops into my head. Yes, brilliant. That's really interesting. Thank you. So you mentioned you're doing a podcast. I have to say, I heartily discourage this. But if you must persist in this endeavour, just tell us what's that all about.
Oh, rivalry.
The scene ain't big enough.
Yeah, so my podcast is called Improv Treehouse, and the name comes from, I kind of wanted to convey the idea of it being like a secret kids club and like a Saturday morning cartoon type nerd fest thing.
Right. Okay.
And what I really want it to be is getting troops together and just sort of recording them talking to each other.
Wow.
And the idea comes from, there's a troupe in Nottingham, so Rhymes is one troupe and another one is Vox Pops, and they're a brilliant Armando team. And I was just in the pub with them, listening to them talking about a rehearsal they'd just had in like really, really early days, and just without like sort of participating a little bit, but mostly just listening to them and just finding it so interesting. Like it was really an insight into how troupes function. So I really want it to be more like a conversation between people in the same troupe that's occasionally prodded by an enigmatic and charming host.
Yes, well, if you find one of those. That does sound a really good idea. The reason I haven't done that is that it's hard enough organising for myself and a guest to be in the same room at the same time, never mind trying to get...
Yeah, well, mine is mostly, I think, going to be fortnightly, at least to begin with, because otherwise it is just going to get overwhelming. But one particular thing I really want to encourage with it is, like, as sacrilegious as this is to say on the Improv London podcast, is encouraging the idea that there is improv outside of London. So I know.
Sorry, I'm doing my shock face once again, failing to remember this is an audio format. I'm doing my sarcastic shock face.
But yeah, so like the Birmingham Improv Festival is in a couple of weeks, and we're going up to perform. Rhymes are going up to perform in that, and we're performing alongside Jumprov.
Oh right.
And they are I don't know if they're the UK's, but they're definitely the Midlands. I think they're the UK's first Black, Asian, and minority ethnic improv team. Right.
There's also New Zealand, the UK. Well, there. It's not competition. It's good. It's good that there are two.
So they're I'm going to be recording with them as well, cool. And like asking all about that. But like, there's just loads of troupes that I didn't really know existed until I started researching them, and there's like, in Norwich and Birmingham and Leicester and all over the place, there's just loads of improvisers doing really, really brilliant work. While I think it's, the London scene is vibrant and it's brilliant, and oh my God, there's an improvised Twin Peaks, that sounds amazing. But there's also like loads of stuff going on all around the country. One of my best friends who I did university level improv with now lives in Brighton, and he's involved with two troupes there with Off the Cuff and Blanket Fort.
Oh right, yes.
And they do like really, really great like long form and short form and just brilliant stuff. And I kind of want to increase the visibility of groups like that.
That sounds great.
And like not being afraid to like travel around a bit and meet people and see the kind of shows that they do. Like just loads of stuff that I didn't realise was out there, doing loads of different things.
And having a podcast is a wonderful excuse to meet up with people and talk about improv. And I do find it weird that it's like, I would find it odd to just approach people and say, oh, hi, can we just meet to talk about improv? But if I say, hi, can we meet, and then I'll record what we say and I'll share it on the internet, and suddenly, that's normal, that's fine. That's the world we live in today.
Yeah.
What a strange place we live in today.
Yeah, definitely. But it's brilliant. It's a brilliant platform. I discovered Improv Podcast about a couple of years ago, and I just fell down the rabbit hole completely. Yeah. But I very much agree with you in the terms of like performance in podcasts, because I think that can work brilliantly. Yeah. Like Improv for Humans, they do that brilliant thing where they get in musicians, and then they play a song, and then the improvisers do scenes inspired by the songs. Yeah. And that works great over podcast format, because like you can really focus in on the songs and like also really focus in on the scenes. Yeah. And a few people in Nottingham were like, oh, so is there going to be performance opportunities with it? And it's like, I don't know. I think it's really interesting to hear people talking about improv and about why they love it, and I think that's enough to sustain itself. Because I know what would happen. I'd get people in and be like, "Wow, that's an incredibly interesting story you just told." Anyway, here's whose line. Take some lines from a hat and see what happens.
I think. I'm hesitating. I do have trouble listening to recorded improv. I don't find it very satisfactory. and I've yet really to kind of really clearly work out why that is. I think if you're there and you're seeing it being created, you're part of it. Whereas if it's created and you're not there, I don't know.
Does that extend to you with like TV as well, or is it just over audio?
In what way?
So like if you are watching Whose Line Is It Anyway on TV, do you find that you enjoy that less and you find that less satisfying, or is it just if you're hearing audio that you're like finding it less satisfying? I started interviewing you now.
It's good. You're very good. You're very good. I can see why you used to have your own podcast. You do. I don't normally like it when people switch the tables because I'm much better at asking questions than I answering them. I think with Whose Line, it's so edited.
Yeah.
You know, I can't remember how long it is that they recorded for to make each half-hour episode. So I think maybe if it's edited tightly, then it can still be entertaining. I don't know.
I think in America, the way they do it is they record like a 3-hour batch with the same improvisers.
Doesn't that sound exhausting?
They edit it into like 3 episodes, depending on how well it went.
Yeah.
But yeah, what a time to be alive. Whose Line Is It Anyway is back in the US. Come on, UK.
Although at least you can watch the classic series on Channel 4 website now. It's all there. You can go back. Yeah.
Can you?
Yeah, if you go to the Channel 4 website.
I must go.
Watch it all, and it's really interesting, because I watched the first episode, and it's like when I watched the first episode, I'm sure I didn't know who Sondheim was.
Yeah.
And Josie Lawrence does a brilliant Sondheim song, which was now I understand, but at the time I'm like, well, it's amazing. She's making up a song. I don't really get the genre, but it's
Witchcraft.
You're also forming a new group?
Yes, it is as yet untitled. So it's going to be Miss Imp and I think the Midlands, but I'm not sure. It's going to be an all-female Harold team. Basically what I really want it to be is quite emotional, relationship-driven Harolds, like in the very traditional structure, so ABC group scene, because don't get me wrong, like the improv scene is getting really diverse and it's wonderful, and there's like more women involved, and like with Jumprov there's increased diversity all across the board, but in Miss Imp now there's enough of a all-female improv community that I think it's kind of like it's just a really interesting chance to do something a bit different and see if any what kinds of different improv emerge, and just create a real sort of safe space for the women, because especially what's going on in the news at the moment with that awful executive man whose name I cannot remember, which is awful.
I can, we're not going to mention it.
Okay, yeah, that was a choice that I forgot his name. But yeah, I just think it's really important to do as much as we can to encourage the visibility and diversity of the improv community, and that starts with creating groups that fill those sort of needs. I'm holding auditions for it next month. But yeah, it's also I just think the great thing about that I'm already discovering, even just through planning rehearsals, is just it's quite easy to set up your own troupe to do the kind of improv that you really love doing.
Yes.
And I'd encourage anyone to do it and just see what happens and see if you can find like-minded people to be interested in. So for instance, like one thing that one of the very first shows I did was entirely monologues, like improvised monologues. And I hate being on stage by myself. I get terrified. But having that as one of the first shows I did was a really a kind of core skill that I learned, to just be comfortable improvising with just yourself in the audience. And I think a lot of troupes and a lot of because improv is a collaboratory and it's teamwork, and that's great. But there is something very powerful about being able to hold the stage by yourself.
Yes.
One thing that I really want to work on is having a Harold that's 5 people, so 2 people in an A scene, 2 people in a B scene, and 1 person in a C scene, and being able to sustain an entire beat of the show to themselves.
Yeah.
Which is something that is terrifying, but also just if you can do it, then the world is your oyster.
Yeah. Yeah, I had some experience of that. Not deliberately, but I was at the Duck Duck Goose Jam, and everyone else had left the stage, and there was just me, and I'm like, well, I've sat here for a bit now. I can't now just leave. I just need to tough this out. And, I just incorporated things that people had brought on. And then it was I hadn't planned to do that, but it was really satisfying.
Yeah.
Thinking, oh, I can just sit there. And I didn't do very much. I didn't feel I needed to do very much. And just reincorporate some of the things that had been in the scene. And actually, it was really satisfying, I thought.
Yeah, well, that's the thing I tend to find about like when you're on the stage by yourself, the audience is just half the time so impressed that you're on the stage by yourself that will sustain them. And I think we touched on it off camera, but yeah, I've been reading a lot more improv theory books. Like I've well and truly fallen down that rabbit hole. I've ordered Katie Schute's book, and I'm so excited.
Brilliant. It's brilliant. I've started to do it. Yes, it's really, really good.
I'm really, really looking forward to that. But just, I've been reading so much stuff, and I think it's really interesting learning about improv through reading it and a lot more theory.
Yes.
As long as you're doing it accompanying like actual practice.
Yes.
Then it's fine.
I like to read a lot of improv books because that's just the way I am, because I like to do my homework. But also it's helpful because then when you're in a workshop, it's the practical side of things that you're working on, and if you've got a good ground of the theory already, you can sometimes take that on board a bit more quickly, because in the workshop I want to be practicing and I want to be doing. Whereas, if I'm just reading, that's when I can try and take in the theories and stuff like that.
And it's for me, it's when you find something that you think that's perfectly expressed. So, for instance, with me, I was reading Keith Johnston's Improv for Storytellers. Which is an interesting read. He's a character.
He is a character.
But he said this thing in there where this is not going to be an exact quote at all. It's going to be a complete butchering. But he said something like, you shouldn't be afraid of silence because you can hear the audience laugh, but you can't hear the hairs on their arms standing up as they react to something that you do. And I think that's something that I really want to carry forward in the kind of, like, with this troupe, like, a laugh is absolutely brilliant, a laugh is wonderful, a laugh is life-sustaining when you're on stage. But if you can get an ah, or you can get like a shocked gasp, or you can get just an audience that is comfortable in complete silence, then that's something really, really special. And I think that's something that shouldn't be shied away from so much in improv.
Definitely, yeah. Having that theatrical, emotional honesty, I definitely agree with that. Is there another book to go with your top three? I'm going to say Katie, and I'm asking the tough questions today. I realise it's hard to put you on the spot here for your top three.
My top three improv books.
Yes.
Okay, that is more relevant. You know, we're going to go about how I love Harry Potter for the next 10 minutes.
We could do a separate podcast about that.
I'm not going to lie. I really, really love. Oh my gosh, it's UCB's book.
The Comedy Handbook.
Yes, I'm reading it right now. It's in my bag over there. I think 90% of the reason that I love it is because it's just beautiful. Like there's pictures and it's gorgeous. I love it when books take things back to basics, but they're not patronising. Like it's literally explaining what a platform to scene is and what yes and is, but it's just written in such an accessible but like not patronising way. I love that one.
Yes. I think that's a brilliant book, and even though the UCB approach isn't really my approach, I'm not very good at being funny or having sketch-like situations. Just having that approach explained to me so clearly has really helped my understanding of it, and I think it's invaluable. So
and also stuff like I've done Harold's before, but having it stripped completely bare and just explained in like layman's terms is just brilliant. I've got like a list of ones that I need to read, so this list is probably going to change. Katie Schute's will probably be up there, but I haven't got it yet.
It will be there.
I'd say probably I do like Keith Johnston, even though he's a character, and his list of how to play men and how to play women at the back of his book made me physically like shake with rage. But we'll move past that. Probably my favourite improv book is the TJ and Dave.
Improvising at the speed of
I love that book. And I really enjoy examples in improv. I can completely understand why people don't, because it's happened on a stage and then it's gone forever, and that's the beauty of improv. But I personally really, really like it when a book uses examples, and they're just the examples they use and the way that they write. I really, really love TJ and Dave. I saw them at Soho Theatre this year, and it was just incredible.
It was, and that book is one of the few where I've had a pencil and I've just underlined stuff, and I've underlined more stuff, and I realise I've just probably underlining all of it, so I should probably not underline all of it. But I'd be right in the margin going, yes, I agree, yes. And I saw them this year as well, and I just thought, wow, it's easy. When you're involved in improv a lot, it's easy sort of to take it for granted and not quite see it as a chore, but and then you see something as effortless, seemingly effortless like that, and you think, wow, that is what, it's not the only thing that can be done with improv, but it's like, what an amazing thing.
Yeah, it reminds you that it's an art form.
I
think you kind of, when you're playing in a pub with your mates and you're occasionally making the odd dick joke in a musical, you forget that it is actually like this incredible, uplifting, beautiful, brilliant thing that we're all a part of, and it's a wonderful community. And just, I don't know, reading that book was like really, really grounding and humbling. We've got a new Improv in Nottingham called The Clones, which has got Liam, who's in Rhymes Against Humanity, and Lloydie, who's also in Rhymes Against Humanity and the May Days, done all sorts of stuff, and they do that sort of style, and they're just terrific. Makes me obscenely jealous. I used to do a Improv, and I do really miss it. Like, there's just something so about having one other person on stage to take care of, and that's it, and not having to worry about any overarching story that is just it's just a different way of doing things, and it's so organic and just brilliant.
Yes, I love performing with Brady and Dr. Tuprov, because you only have to listen to one other person. I mean, that's just going to make it a lot easier, and also organising rehearsals and shows is just a lot easier. Brady, can you make it? Yes, okay, we'll do it then.
We don't have a keyboard, we don't need a keyboard. Good point.
So if someone was to appear on stage with you in a group or in a jam, what could they do to delight you?
Oh, what a good question. Oh, I'm going to steal that question.
I think I've stolen it from Jules' mum's of the nursery where we are now. So, and it's a hard question, so I'm just going to sort of fill.
No, I'm a big believer in gifts. In improv, and I'm a very big believer in finding the meaning gradually in a scene.
Right.
Like, some forms of improv don't lend themselves to that. Musical theatre, you tend to want to get to the point as soon as possible and make everything in the world as clear as possible. But one thing that I really love is when someone else makes a really bold emotional choice at the top of a scene, and we sort of find the reason for that gradually. So for instance, starting the scene by laughing. I did a scene recently, and I cannot remember who it was with or in what context, but they just looked at me and started the scene by laughing. And I just remember thinking, what a brilliant initiation. You've kind of you can assume so much from that. There's so much wealth in there, and it's immediately establishing a relationship and a rapport without uttering a single word.
Yes.
Strong emotional choices at the top of the scene, because I can just be like, yep, this person's got it. We can just relax now and just see where this goes and ride the wave. I love that laughing at the beginning of a scene is a particularly lovely one. The thing I struggle with is just trying to hold on to that and not have that and then sort of drop it. And then it's holding on to it while moving the scene on. But that's a lovely way to start a scene. So you talk about gifts. So if you've been in a group with somebody for a while, do you prefer to delight them or to mess with them when you're on stage? Oh, I'm really not good at messing with people.
No?
I'm really not very good at messing with people. One of my favourite things to do is to make it look like I am messing with someone when I am actually not.
Right, okay, let's unpack that.
So, for instance, we had a show recently where someone said, what are the 7 rules? That there are 7 rules within this club. And then everyone was like, what are the 7 rules? And the improviser, Jeanette, she's in Rhymes Against Humanity, she's brilliant. She listed the 7. And then in a subsequent scene, she went, what's rule 4? She was like, it's like they say in rule 4. And I just ran on from the back line and I was like, excuse me, miss, I'm a reporter. Can you just remind me what rule 4 is? And the entire audience was like, oh. But I was like, no, I know Jeanette. she'll have remembered it.
Oh, she would have remembered it.
And she I don't know if she remembered it exactly, but she remembered it close enough, and the audience had forgotten it. So they went nuts. They were like, oh my God, she's remembered, amazing.
Yeah.
And like that's the kind of messing where it's like, I very much enjoy where it looks like I am dropping someone in it, but in my head I know that they've got it.
Oh, that's lovely. It's lovely if you know that they will have remembered it. I mean, because that was a no-lose scenario, because if she's made something new up, the audience would also have found that hilarious as well. But if you know someone's strengths, and then you can come on and, that's a really lovely distinction of, knowing someone well enough that you can seem like you're dropping it in them, but you know they've got it.
Yeah.
And you actually... that is a wonderful gift to let them show off how good they are.
You do want to just pimp someone into showing themselves off a bit sometimes. It's like, in addition, like Lloydie's really, really just, he's a fantastic improviser, really good at solos. So there's been a few times where people have just sort of walked off stage and he's been like, well, solo. And then he did that to me in last week's rehearsal and I was like, oh, this is what it feels like. Oh, no.
Cool. So, big final question. What is your signature move? What is it that you do on stage and they go, classic Brady, saved the day again with a signature move, bringing it home, taking it to church, all that sort of business?
Oh, my signature move. Another excellent question.
Also, I asked this for two reasons. One is that other people can learn from it and then learn your signature move and adopt it, and also it means you don't get stuck, because people might go, that's Emily's signature move, she talks about it on the podcast. So I'm forcing you to develop as a performer.
I would actually, my signature move has remained unchanged since I started improv in 2011, and I have been told off for it. But my signature move is probably to have my character fall in love with another character.
Oh, that's...
like it is, but when you do it a lot, it's a bit like it's not a bad mood to have, but at the same time, I think it's the tendency can be sometimes that I have is I'm like, oh, my character doesn't have enough, and there's not enough, and maybe there's not enough emotion in the show. Maybe it's all quite like whimsical and quite chatty, and I'll be like, I'm going to ground this in emotion. But the thing is, there are so many ways to do that. You can be angry at someone, you can admire someone, there's a million and one ways to play with improvisers and to heighten the emotional stakes.
Yes.
And while I think falling in love is very musical theatre, and it is a strong choice, it is something that I go to a lot, and it's something that it's kind of my default.
Right, okay.
Like, oh, my character hasn't got enough going on. Boom, I am now in love with this character. Like I was playing a villain the other day for the first time in a while, and my character ended up falling in love with the protagonist. I was like, damn it, like...
Oh, that's lovely,
I wanted to play a villain who was just like evil and maniacal, and now I'm in love. Curses.
Oh, I think I want that to be my signature move. Thank you for being on the Improv London podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you very much, that was brilliant.
I made this.
That's improv!